Perry Van Vleck was a real estate developer. He was living in Silver Spring, and he moved to Dunkirk to have a country home in the mid-1950s. And he chose to restore an old house in Dunkirk. And that was one of his first historic restorations. And then he envisioned a really exciting project. He decided he would move some houses that were in fact in front of the bulldozer. They were houses that were derelict, frame houses that could be moved. And you have to understand that house moving back in the mid-70s was a little more common than it is today. But then you put it on a truck or in some cases on a barge and you moved it. And he did that with 8 of the houses that are just a bit north of Lower Marlboro town itself. He made each of them into a showplace. Each of them has its history. And what he really did for Lower Marlboro was we wouldn't have been here. All these houses would have fallen down. Nobody would have thought about the town. And now, in fact, it's a little historic gem. One of the houses that he brought, one of the largest ones, was called Ridgely. Van Vleck would often move more than one structure and sort of plug them together and make something that would work better in today's time. So for instance, he brought a log cabin and attached it to that house at Ridgely. The log cabin is now the kitchen. Another house that I really love is the Plummer House, which is Bill Law's house right now. But that's another thing, is some of these houses belong to people right now. They belonged to other people before, and they'll belong hopefully to other people in the future. So that the houses continue on. You sort of feel as if you're a sort of a curator or a custodian of the house. It's your privilege to own that house. So the Plummer House has some wonderful Victorian architecture and twists that were actually added to the house later. Some of the gingerbread trim on that house came from a house that was destroyed by a tornado in 1913 that was actually right across the road from where we're sitting right now. I think without Van Vleck, Lower Marlboro would have just probably moldered away. There was nothing in the way of commerce left here. Lower Marlboro wouldn't really exist anymore because he was the first to come in and restore a house in the little village. Patuxent Manor, the brick home, had been started in restoration only a few years before. But other than that, all these frame houses were really almost falling down. And I think they would have fallen down. And I think that's the major difference. And then, of course, he brought the 8 houses that he moved, he brought those, and that also increased and coalesced some of the town's infrastructure. So now it's reviewed as some place people drive through, bicyclists come through. People want to be here. They want to see these historic homes. But he was an amateur historian as well as being a real estate developer. He knew a lot about both sides of what was going to be involved if he did restore historic homes. So over those next 20 or so years, he restored several houses in southern Maryland, and then he decided that he would restore a house in Lower Marlboro, and that's the house we're sitting in right now. He decided to rename it. It was an old store and a post office as well as a dwelling, and he renamed it the Harbormaster's house. One of the things about Van Vleck was he's a very flamboyant person. He had a lot of imagination. So when he came to old houses, he not only looked into the real history of the house, he also looked into what might have been happening there, since a lot of history isn't really known. Back in the 1600s, Lower Marlboro became designated as a place where taxes were collected for the colony. He decided this might have been the house where that happened. Of course, we don't really know.
Growing up in Lower Marlboro, is everybody seemed to get along with everybody. There seemed to be quite an interdependence that the neighbors had with one another. And the focal point, the actual axis Monday, the center of the universe, was the old store that was operated by Elsie Cox. And that was quite the place to congregate and get the daily news from your neighbors. I vividly remember people unhitching their horses from their farm implements, and they would ride the horse down, hitch it up to the hitching post in front of the store. They'd get their mail, and they'd get themselves a 6-ounce Coca-Cola and a can of sardines and a tube of crackers, and they would sit there and have a brunch. Leonard Jones was the local mailman, and every morning Leonard would bring everybody's mail to Miss Elsie. She would sort it, and then people would come and pick up their magazines and that sort of stuff. The big deal at the store was when people in the spring of the year would mail order these chicks. And when the boxes of these chicks would come to the store waiting for pickup, my brother and sister and I could not take ourselves away from there and staring in these holes in these boxes with all these baby chicks in it.